the world isn't coming at me combatively. I'm assuming it will, preemptively going, don't do it or I'll fight you. And the world sees me, oh, he wants to fight, and is coming at me with fight because I'm coming at it with fight. And so there's a humbleness to this kind of the world is blank, because then you begin to realize it's like, wait a minute, the world isn't combative. I'm combative. And the world is responding to me being combative, even if I'm doing it innocently, and even if I'm doing it out of self-defense or some type of self-preservation. Suddenly realizing I don't have to take up arms and that I'm not going to be attacked is a peaceful relief. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
People of the podcast world, it is Evan and I. We are back recording another episode for your enjoyment. So today, just trying to make Evan giggle, which I achieved successfully. So today we're talking about blank. The world is ... blank, or whatever, fill in the blank. So this is something that we do, whether we know it or not. We're always trying to make sense of things, and we have interpretations. And I think part of this episode is probably about perception, but it's kind of a little bit about how we make it up and how we interpret it. And Evan and I spent probably the last couple hours just talking about story and elements of story and myth and lore, and and we had a lot of great stuff come up, and ultimately we settled on this idea that, well, what's the blank? What is it that story does? What's it filling in? What's it piecing together? And I'll just share personally something that came up for me as I was, I've just been working through some things and figuring out, navigating the world. And I realized that sometimes I fill in the word blank, the world is blank, with kind of a conflict term or like a war kind of perception, meaning that the world is dangerous, or it's going to attack me, or I need to be, or it's a fight, right? Or it's a conflict, or it's a competition. Sometimes these things come in for me, and I've become acutely aware of this, and I've realized that my ego, my prescribed identity, self-prescribed mostly, is sometimes armoring up to deal with a world that is at war or at conflict or whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't always serve me. This isn't a great way for me to do certain things. And in fact, sometimes it brings up fears or issues that are totally just ghosts that I'm making up. And I think this is the kind of this whole power of this conversation is, I was like, well, if I was going to fill in blank with something else, I'd rather be a place of peace and harmony and love, and, and maybe it can be. And so anyway, that kind of spurred on some of our story talk and whatever from my end. But I'm going to pass it on to Evan, and he can share what he thinks we're talking about.
And by the way, that intro that you had, it just sounded like a little bit dirty, a little bit sleazy. It's like, you've had some really, really weird and entertaining intros over the last while. Anyhow, into what we're getting into. Yeah, into what we're getting into. There's a phrase for you. The world is, it's funny, just as we started recording, I made things like, I remember the world is blank is actually, I think, an exercise, not necessarily an exercise, but something that I remember from Larry Moss's book, The Intent to Live, where he talks about point of view. Right, which is an important thing as an actor to try and understand. You need to try and understand the point of view of the character that you're playing. Some actors might argue that that's the most important thing to spend time on. Right, is like how do they see the world? Like, what is that thing? And he presents a very simple way of going about it. I mean, there's many ways of doing it, but on a very simple level, I think he offers, okay, you write the world is, and then fill it with like 5 adjectives or verbs to describe how you interpret what you believe your character's perspective is. And even it's like, oh yeah, like it's saying like the world is dangerous, it's attacking me. It's like, because those things are going to shape how that person, that character responds to the people and to the things that happen in it, right? And just sort of part of that part of the acting process where you're just trying to build an understanding and trying to nourish yourself with these understandings to help you in your performance. But so that was one thing that just popped into my head just at the outset. It's like, oh yeah, this is just like that activity, that exercise for actors, but that that exists in acting because it exists in us as human beings. Like, it's hard to distill what a person's point of view of the world is down to 5 things. I'd even argue that, for playing a character, right? It's like an oversimplification, but it's, getting to just trying to get to some of the essence of what that thing is can still be tremendously beneficial and informing and all kinds of things. There is another side to this conversation that I'm interested in exploring, and we were talking a little bit about it before we started recording, which is the stories that we have, that we tell ourselves, and how those so often, maybe even typically, differ from the stories that we tell in our culture through books and through movies and or even audio. Like there's the hero's journey. We talk about story so much, but there was an interesting thing to me there in our pre-chat about how there's this difference between those two things. It's like, how come for so many of us, the story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves is so very often small and diminutive? Like maybe we don't say it to other people, but to ourselves, when we're by ourselves, and we say all kinds of terrible shit about ourselves and put us down and make ourselves small. And on the opposite end of that, we watch these stories about these, my favorite stories. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like a good superhero movie when it when it comes along, but for the most part, my favorite movies are about just normal people. Someone who's not unlike myself or people that I know, and they're just everyday people who go through something and who grow and become more, and they're still heroes, right? There's this, we place them in this medium, we tell the story, and suddenly they're not just this person from some nowhere part of the world. Like their story and their struggle and what they go through and how they come out of it and how they become stronger, or whatever it is, that's us. And to me, as I was saying to you, it's like, I think that we tell those stories to remind ourselves that that's true, that story it's not just a story, it's true, and it's true about who we are, right? And it's almost like it's a countermeasure against the voices that we have rattling around and the stories that we have rattling around within ourselves. So that's what I got to open it up.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of places to go with this, a lot of territory to explore. I think that we don't always realize the impact we have on the world, and we don't see how connected we are. One thing that I found with story is, as you get into story and you if you want to become proficient at it, the thing that kind of keeps coming back to me, like no matter where I look at what technique, it all kind of keeps coming back to how is this connected? Because basically, if you can't answer how something is connected, it becomes random and it's coincidence. And these are things that you don't actually really want in story unless you're using it in a comedic way. And the only reason why it works comedically is because it's so ridiculous to us. We sometimes go, yeah, like life doesn't work that way. That's why it's funny, right? But everything is connected. So you want to kind of see connectedness. And I think with our own life, one of the challenges that we face is we don't actually see how we're connected. We don't actually see where things are tied into things and how they're part of the same root, even though the plants look different on the surface. So like, something that there's so many places to go with this, but let me start with kind of maybe the most vulnerable one. When I was in like school, like elementary school and a bit through high school, I was bullied a fair amount. And people today, whenever I tell them that, they're usually pretty surprised because, like I'm more confident, I'm more collected, I'm pretty witty. I can come back at somebody if they come at me, there's a certain amount of kind of poise, right? So I'm not an easy target like I was. But I think what's transcendent about bullying is that when you realize that you enabled it, and that's, for people that are still in that kind of victim state of like, I'm bullied and it's not my fault. Like I totally get that because that's how I felt. But what I've come to start to realize is how I actually enabled it and how I don't even know if it's enable it, but I fear I will enable it again. So, one of the things is like, if you see how you're connected to somebody, so basically, people mirror back and the world mirrors back what's in your internal world. And I could get into like trying to prove that, but if, that's a whole other thing, but let me start with this. So you can accept that the world mirrors back what you give it. You begin to see that the world is really merely just showing you yourself. And sometimes it's showing you a part of yourself you don't like. And it's also showing you the equal opposite of you. So, for example, you might not be a bully, but your commitment to victimhood makes the world bully you. Because for you to maintain the victim story, you have to have the world bully you to keep it intact. So in some ways, you're going to set up your environment to bully you so that you can continue to play the role of the victim. And then what happens is the world is blank, the world is dangerous, the world is out to get me, the world is picking on me, becomes manifest because you actually created a perception and an interdynamic connectedness of it. And what ends up happening is, if you transcend that, which, in some ways I did, I transcended the playing the victim, but I still have that childhood belief of like, yeah, but the world might bully me. And it's scary to me sometimes. And recognizing that the very thing I'm scared of is actually something that I enable, which gives me a certain amount of power and responsibility over the thing. Like I can create it. So like, and I'll explain how this manifests just real quick. Like one of the ways what happens is I come at the world sometimes combatively. And I've come to realize with myself, like this kind of attitude of like, don't fuck with me. If you fuck with me, I'll fuck with you, like I'll fucking, you know what I mean? But it's like, the world isn't coming at me combatively. I'm assuming it will, preemptively going, don't do it or I'll fight you. And the world sees me, oh, he wants to fight. And is coming at me with fight because I'm coming at it with fight. And so there's a humbleness to this kind of the world is blank because then you begin to realize it's like, wait a minute, the world isn't combative. I'm combative. And the world is responding to me being combative. Even if I'm doing it innocently and even if I'm doing it out of self-defense or some type of self-preservation, suddenly realizing I don't have to take up arms and that I'm not going to be attacked is a peaceful relief. And one thing just to further this point, in my family, when you had an argument, I'm not going to say always, but sometimes it would just turn into a fight. So I have this kind of perception sometimes when I confront someone or I state a boundary that I need to be prepared to fight for that boundary. Like that's not just going to be accepted. What I've found a lot of the time is I tell someone a boundary or a thing that I want, and they're like, oh, cool. I didn't realize. Oh, sorry about that. No problem. And I'm like, oh, okay. Carrying on. Like, no, there's no fucking argument about it. Like, you're just, oh, I didn't know that about you. Okay, no problem. Like, just thanks for telling me. And it's like, wow, we could get through that peacefully. And there's a certain amount of, I don't know if anyone else can relate on this, but you might come into the world ready to fight, ready to defend yourself. And the world has no desire to fight you on this thing you want or you're declaring, but you think it will. And so you spend a lot of time armoring up and preparing and getting ready for a fight when there's no fight needed to be had. But sometimes you have to recognize that because you prepared for the fight, it actually created the fight in the first place. And it might not have been there had you not come in combatively. So anyway, these are awarenesses that I've been having about the world is blank, because sometimes I realize that I sometimes see the world in a way that doesn't serve me.
Our lives are not so much shaped by our experiences as they are by our expectations, as I once read. Right? What we expect of the world. And, there's a lot of simple experiments that have been done that you can do where, if you go out for a walk or something like that and just take note to notice all of the red cars that you see, and you're going to start seeing red cars everywhere, right? That you wouldn't normally otherwise see. We kind of do a similar thing to ourselves with that whole game where like we're that expectation is us looking for something.
Yeah, we filter for it.
Yeah, we filter for it, exactly. Filter for it. That's a nice little package of words there. And
we also block things out because we filter. Right?
Yeah, there was an image sort of that was described in an Alan Watts book where, we take, because here's the thing, a lot of, I was saying, like those expectations, those things do come out of experiences that we've had, right? And we don't want that experience to happen again. And so we do, these things and we create these filters and whatever, because that's going to help protect us and keep us safe, keep us away from pain and yada, yada, yada. Doesn't always work out that way. Very often they're the thing that starts causing us a lot of pain and trouble. But I digress on that. Alan Watts described a lot of these experiences, these memories that we have as, like those like fire sort of lanterns or whatever that people like spin, or sometimes like a sparkler or something like that. And it's like, well, when you hold it still, it's just fixed in one point, but you start spinning that thing around and it gives this illusion of continuity. Like there's one solid line that exists. He might have been using it to describe something else, but I see it describing this somewhat as well, where we take these experiences that we've had, these unpleasant experiences, and they don't just remain in one sort of little blip, one moment in time, but we take that thing and we start spinning it around, and it makes it appear as though it's just existing everywhere all the time, right? Like it's created this it creates a false reality, right? Like it's an illusion that we've placed upon ourselves, right? That fire is not actually in this circle right now. It's actually just only in one point at any given time. And just some of what you were saying was making me think of that image. I don't know if I have anything else other than that. Sure.
So, well, that's a great example I think you're bringing up. And if we have one moment of something, that's just one moment that happened. But when we see that moment reoccur, in story, they call this like often a motif, where it comes up again and again and again. What ends up happening is we begin to pay attention to something. Like repetition causes us to pay attention. There's a certain amount of, when I see things a couple times, I begin to notice. When I see it 3 times, I must notice. And if I see it any more than that, then it means something that I have to like seriously pay attention to, right? It's like, hey, it's coming up, right? So if you like go through an experience once, if it's nothing major, it can kind of pass by and you go, oh yeah, I kind of know what that's like. It happened. But if it happens over and over again, like for me, I would go to school, I would get bullied. I go to school, I get bullied. I go to school, I get bullied. So then it starts to happen a bunch of times. What ends up happening is you begin to go, okay, this is a constant. And so then, I've learned to call them maladaptive strategies. They're maladaptive because you adapt to it, but it's a strategy that actually hinders you, hurts you, harms you, causes despair, causes all sorts of problems in your life. And then what happens though is maladaptive strategies don't always go through checks and balances. And if you can retain a certain amount of comfort or denial or deflection from them, they can go without ever being visited again in your life. And they become this painful sore spot that you just don't even want to look at or integrate with ever again. The problem is usually when you push yourself into something uncomfortable or something outside of your regular zone of comfort, often these maladaptive strategies come and revisit you, and then you're confronted with them. And some people just go, well, that's my limit. I don't want to do it. I'll just run away from it. And I'm not that interested. And it's called dissonance, right? So you begin to create dissonance and you go, I don't really care about it anyway. And the truth is you do care about it, but you don't want to face up to your maladaptive strategy. What I found is like, okay, so I have maladaptive strategies, and instead of having dissonance and running from it, I'm going like, well, sometimes I just feel afraid to talk to people. And I'm like, what is that about? And it's like, and what's being demanded of me is I need to talk to people right now. And that's part of what I have to do based on my goals and my aspirations and whatever. And so I can go, okay, either I give up on these goals and aspirations or I go and talk to people. And it's like, well, why are you scared to talk to people? And then I look at it, it's like most conversations I have are really positive. Things are really good. I mean, I don't even really remember the last time I had a really negative conversation, to be honest. Yet sometimes I still get scared to talk to people. And it comes back to probably being a kid and speaking an idea, and someone said, well, that's a stupid idea, or you're stupid, or da-da-da, or whatever happened. And my maladaptive strategy was just keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything. In fact, keep to your own and no one will bother you. And that's a maladaptive strategy, but it's like something that got incorporated into my way of being. And, I'm going to pass this to you in a second, but something else that was very interesting, and I've heard this come up several times in my life. And this wasn't always said about me. It was sometimes just said, just in general as like a thing, is that you're not an introvert. You're actually an extrovert, but what you require is feeling safe, secure, supported, loved, accepted, whatever. You're an introvert because you perceive the world as not being those things, which makes you respond maladaptively as an introvert when in truth you might actually be an extrovert. But the world doesn't feel safe enough to be extroverted because when you were extroverted when you were younger, for example, or whatever happened, you got beaten down or something happened. And so you just said, I'm going to maladaptively become introverted. And then the problem is like, it kind of works, but also it doesn't work because there's a party that wants to express itself and it's not being expressed. It creates other issues. I mean, we could go into that, but you get what I'm saying, right? So maladaptive strategies is something.
I like it. I like that term. And a lot of what you're saying makes me think of that sort of what a lot of people experience typically in childhood at some point in time, which is like the creative wound, right? Because what you're saying is that, yeah, I can relate to that a lot. I can relate to that. Just keep your mouth shut because, whenever you put your idea out there, you say your thing, having the experience often enough of somebody, just being really shitty, really is what it comes down to. Someone just being really shitty, somebody who just doesn't have an understanding or an appreciation or whatever. And sometimes, because who comes to my mind is like, who is the worst culprit of that in my life? It was my brother. Like my brother was just awful when it came to that, and he's older, right? So it's just like, everything you do is stupid, and anything you and it can really, unfortunately, shut people down, right? A lot of artists and creatives who never came to be because it wasn't safe. Right? Being creative and outspoken or expressive, whatever you want to call it, just was never made in a safe place, or at a certain point, it was made not a safe place for people to go. And I mean, it's still kind of like that out there, particularly today. People put out their stuff, their music, their writing, their whatever it is, and there's shitty people out there who are going to shit on you, right? And there is a reality to that. But does that mean that what you're doing is not valid or valuable? No. Like, it's not at all. Like, there's what other people's opinions are of you and what you do is their business. I mean, that's easier said than done. Mm-hmm. But it is true. It is true, I think. And this topic, the world is blank, is an interesting one because there are so many directions it can go, because the statement itself is there's no actual answer to it. It's something that was occurring to me, is that it's like, well, yeah, that there's a reason why it's like a blank, because there's nobody who just possesses that answer. Like, it's and even trying to come up with it as some sort of answer, even for ourselves, is like yes and no. Right? Like, it's always like it's one of those things, like it's never a set thing. It's not a set it and forget it situation, right? Like, it's something that I think you can continue to explore and investigate for your whole life, right? And then people, in the next generation into their lives, right? The world is, it's all kinds of things. Right? It's so many things. It's overwhelming how many things it is. It's so many things that we can't even comprehend it. Not rationally, we can't comprehend it. Right? Like, it just, life refuses to be contained and bottled down in that kind of way. So this is, I think, why to a certain degree I feel like I'm having some difficulty with this topic, which I wasn't perceiving when we went into this one. I was like, oh yeah, I think that we can, there's a lot to go here, and there is a lot to go with here, but that's maybe the trouble with it, is that there's just so much to go with here. Like, the world is, well, what do we want to say about what the world is? Do we want to talk about what we personally think? And, we've talked about a lot of very interesting things so far, but I find myself a little bit confounded at this stage of the conversation in terms of like what this conversation is.
Well, I think we got to go back to where this originated from, which is that story. We were talking about storytelling. And I think ultimately, we tell story for a reason. And this is something that I've come to realize is like, no matter what, everybody's telling a story, and some are doing it unconsciously, some are doing it consciously, but you have to look at story and why we do it. And ultimately, story helps us find meaning. It helps us find connection. And ultimately, like, you make something up no matter what. And I think, like, I studied a lot of philosophy when I was in college. It was a big interest of mine, and I still have a passion for it. But one of the things that I learned in philosophy was that, you know, as you begin to go and study philosophy, you don't end up with more answers, you end up with more questions. It's the only way you know you're doing it right, because if you end up with more answers, this isn't philosophy, this is like a belief system that's being, you're taking on. So you should be coming in going like, okay, well, it could be this or that, or, well, if that means if it could be this, then it could be that. And it goes on and on and on. It starts to become actually kind of overwhelming. But one of my philosophy teachers, something he pointed out at one point was like, if you want to believe in God, for example, and it makes your life better, then by all means, believe in God. You know what I mean? Like, to some degree, there's a certain amount of like, does God exist? And we battle with that, and everybody battles with that, to some degree. You go, well, if it makes your life better and it helps you live a better life, to live as though that's true. Now, this is beyond whether that's true or not. Let's not even broach that territory for the time being. The point is, though, does it help you to live a better experience of your life to believe in something, or does it somehow harm your life to believe in something? And I think when it comes to the world is blank, whatever we fill that in with, we need to go, well, if the world is war, does that help me or hurt me? Now, you can look at the ways that it does help you and hurt you. So, for example, well, in some ways, if the world is war, then that means I need to be armed up, I need to be protected, I need to fight, I need to do all this stuff. And that might do some good for you. So that's part of the reason why you chose that. But the other thing too is it might cause harm. And you got to look at these things that you fill in that blank with and go like, wait a minute, does this cause me more harm or does it cause me more help? And if it's causing you harm, especially if it's getting in the way of you doing something you want to do, then you have to be willing to disband it. And one of the things about storytelling, which is very difficult, is that when we found a story, we have a very difficult time letting go of the story, because that means going without anything. And I can tell you from personal experience that having no story and being in chaos is the worst of all. And that's why people avoid it. So they'd rather stick with the story of, I'm this way because when I was a kid, my parents did this and this happened to me, and that's my story and that's who I am. And you can go, well, like, what if that wasn't true? And they go, that's really fucking freaky. I'm going to just go back to that story. And I am this way because such and such happened and such is a thing. And it's like, okay, what you're doing is you're choosing the inertia of a bad story because it's too scary to go without one for the sake of finding a new one. And so one last thing I'll say before I pass it to you is something I found as I've been studying story, and I've been studying it more now than I have in a very long time. I've just been very deep into it. And something that I've begun to discover is that great story, you'll begin to see this to be true. All the roots are somehow connected. Even though the plants in the garden that grow and come out, they're different, you begin to see that things are tied to each other somehow. Inextricably bonded is a term that I like to use. And so then you begin to take something that's like, okay, well, like I was bullied, and then I was hurting, and I was scared, and I was alone. And so then you go, the world is a scary place where I feel alone, and people will attack me if I put myself out there too much. That's your first draft. The next draft is not separate of that. It is not departed of that. This character who becomes whoever they become must feel alone, must feel at war, must feel this way for them to have the humanity and depth, because you want to be the hero, the charismatic hero that's out there expressive and doing, but that character becomes so much richer if they know what aloneness and separateness and hurt feels like. So you begin to see that the blank is not random, but somehow connected to the very story you're telling. It's just in a new interpretation. It's a new adaptation of it and evolves. So I feel like, yeah, it could be anything when we don't find our roots. But if we find our roots, actually, I think the story becomes quite obvious to us. I think it becomes evident, but we're not always willing to take the step into the new draft. We love the first draft and we don't want it to be wrong. And we're just like, it works. I'm using it. It is what it is. And it's like, nah, man, write a new draft, man. Let's make this story better. Let's retell it.
Yeah, the thing that where you went was kind of perfect for where my mind started going with this. I mean, first I wanted to, it's like, yeah, there's a pragmatism to some of this in the sense of like, well, the world is like is the thing that you in the statement that is completely and infinitely open-ended. What is at the end of that statement might as well be something that actually is in service to you in a positive way, right? So I just wanted to touch on that and reflect on that a little bit. But what you were saying there at the end is kind of where I was starting to think about this, where it's like, well, the world is whatever is present, right? Like whatever is present to you right now. And I think that that's part of, again, the interesting philosophical, I suppose, problem to this title and this question of what the world is. And it's like, well, it's whatever is present for you right now in this moment. Yeah, there are all kinds of things going on in the world, but whatever is present to you now is the only actual thing that's a part of your reality. Like that's the only actual thing. Like whatever even if you're thinking about some going on in another part of the world, what's going on is just you thinking about what's going on in that part of the world, right? Like it's not actually what's going on over there. It's what you think about it is what's going on, right? So because the world is always changing. Everything is always changing. Everything it's water, like it's flowing and it's going, around whatever the landscape is, but it's constantly just flowing in whatever direction it's allowed to flow into, or whatever is the sort of that path. And we're a part of it. And I think that whole thing of, that's part of the challenge in it, is that a lot of what we're trying to do is we're trying to fix it in place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? Like we're trying to like, no. Like we need to just stop the water. I don't like the water. I don't like this moving. 'Cause like there's so much that's unknown with that. We don't feel like we're safe on that water. Whereas the reality is that it's like, well, it's not that we're actually on the water. We are actually the water too, right? Like we are change ourselves. Whenever you go and have an interaction with another person, whether it's a friend or a stranger, in that person's eyes, your change happening in this moment to them. You're like, whoa, who's, like, if it's a stranger, it's like, whoa, who's this person? What are they saying to me right now? Like you're part of now what their flow is in life, right? And now you're flowing together in whatever capacity that is, but it's whatever is present. So to try and say, the world is this, and this. Well, I mean, it was that maybe at some moments, and there will probably be moments where it might be that again, but whatever is present now is the only actual reality to what the world is right now. And I know I'm going down like a really I don't know if it's an esoteric rabbit hole. It's definitely a philosophical one on some level, but that's kind of jumping into me right now. This is such a peculiar conversation for me today. I don't know why why that is, but it is. It is what it is. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe.
I love what you brought up about the moving water. I think that's a wonderful way to bring in an analogy to help understand this. There's a quote, and I don't remember who said it. I'll try to look it up, I suppose. But no man steps in the same river twice, because it's a different river, or it's different water, and it's a different man every time. And I think this is the thing, is like, you know, we so badly want, we want to be in the known. We want to be in the consistency of like control. We want that control. And the thing is like, the further you push yourself towards your dreams, your goals, your visions, or extend yourself or face your fears, the more you're going to be in what cannot be constant, which will always be changing. And that's why it's so scary. And so it's kind of like you have to take on a little bit of the mindset of the sailor that's going out from land to find land that isn't attached to that land, that's in a new area. And you're going to go out into the unknown with like total faith in that, hey, if I head out in this direction, I'm eventually going to find something. And I don't know how long it will take. And that period of time when you don't see land, however long that might be, on where you came from or where you're going, you know, that's kind of the abyss, right? And I think that part of this conversation is we are entertaining the idea of the abyss because we're going, well, you know, the world is blank, and it's like, well, that's the abyss. And then you go, well, I don't know what that would look like, but I know what this looks like. So let me just stay landlocked to this idea. And you can't. And you ultimately can't. Well, you I suppose you can in a sense, but like if, you know, one of the things we talked about earlier before we started recording was we were talking about desire. And I've finding desire is interesting because desire is sometimes powerful enough to push you to let go of comforts. And it's quite interesting when you feel that desire, when you're willing to put yourself out there in the experience of the unknown and the abyss, and then, but you desire something that you're willing to go into that realm. And you can have so much desire that you actually find fear just somehow like almost disappears. It becomes irrelevant. And I think when we look at a lot of times heroes, people who do heroic things, it's somehow they have a desire that's greater than their fear. And we fucking love that. Like you look at every fucking Marvel movie or anything like that. It's like you got this badass antagonist you got to fight, like the best ones at least. You got this badass antagonist. You don't know how you're going to feed him. You don't know what you're going to do, but it's right and it's good, and you must, and you can't accept a world without doing it. So you dare to go out and do it. And like, I think part of filling in that blank is letting it be blank for a moment is the scariest part of all, is to remove the word that we have there and then to go, it's unknown, like it's, I don't know, is the part where that's where the courage and the fear and everything come. And then you go, well, like, for example, like there was a period in my life where I was so just depressed and so disillusioned and so lost. I'm like, I don't even know what the point of life is. I don't. And I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death, wondering why I was even alive. And it came to a certain point where it's like, I cannot walk this valley anymore. I will not walk this valley anymore. It's either I end this now or I find the fucking mountain that I'm looking for. And I couldn't see through the trees. I couldn't see. I was walking in the muck in the dark and there was no light and I didn't know which direction to go. And it simply became choose a fucking direction and let's go that way. And you know what? I'm just going to have faith that eventually I'm going to get out of this fucking mess and I'm going to hit something. I'm going to find my light and it's going to make sense. And it did. And I think that in that period of time, I rebuilt myself. So much came out, so much changed, so much transformed. At the same time, there are still some lingering beliefs that came from the old ego self, the old ideal, that was like, wait a minute, the new self doesn't believe that, but the old self kind of hasn't quite let it go and detached from it. And you said something earlier before we recorded, and this last thing I'll say on this, is that, I don't know how you put it, man, but you put it like, are we just like using desire to like rewire a program or something like that? Do you remember what you said? It was something like, we're just trying to kind of like, we're trying to use the same program we did before that doesn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the context in which that came out of, you were talking a little bit about being in a place of having no desire, which, in many sort of spiritual circles, I'd be like, that sounds amazing. But it was not a positive experience that you were having, where it was a thing where it's like, no, you wanted to have some sense of desire of wanting to go for something and wishing you had that. And so I thought it was an interesting comment in the sense that, yeah, like, was it because that was just a part of your old program, and that in order to feel a sense of security and control or whatever it is in your life, that you need to have that desire. And yeah, that was, I think, the essence of what it was. I maybe didn't say it as well the second time here as I did the first time, but yeah, it was an interesting thing to me because, we all have desires, and we feel them come up many times a day, every single day. And what do we do with all of those desires? What do we do with the problem of desire? I guess what a lot of people would say, because as the Buddha said, we suffer because we desire. And so yeah, that was the other aspect. I was like, well, we have this wisdom, but like, what would make us crave having desire, and which is why it's like, I wonder if that's just an old program that's just trying to run again. It was just like, there's some sort of a revelation that you've had, and that's left you without feeling any sense of desire or maybe purpose, right? Which is, I don't think they're necessarily the same thing, right? But in that space of not feeling like you have anything, I can see that, like, well, maybe it's just like a thing trying to like reinsert itself back in, because, well, at least that was something that gave me some sense of what I was doing, right? So I don't know if that was like, if any of that's actually true or not. It was just something that I was kind of wondering about, but I'll move on unless you have something else. Yeah.
So just real brief. I think the thing is that when, like, metaphorically, you're on a journey and you climb mountains and peaks and you go through valleys, but when you go through the dark valley, like the dark soul experience, the dark valley where you can't see anything and you're lost and you're confused and nothing means anything and everything's detached and you're just like, what the hell? It's like the chaos period, right? People have talked about this throughout history, and it's this period. It's sometimes considered even the rock bottom. It's like, what do I do? I'm lost. There's nothing to happen. And so then there can be you get out of you kind of get a glimpse of light out of this dark valley, but it's not the place you came from. It's somewhere new. And because the new place is so kind of weird and different and not like anything you've experienced before, you almost have this clamoring to go back into the valley just because the valley was more comfortable and made more sense. And it was like for example, I want to want something, and then it's like, well, now I'm in this new world and like what I wanted before, I don't want anymore. And now I don't know what to want. But like at least before I wanted to get out of the valley. So like you kind of like want to go back to the valley just because the want to get out of it gives you some semblance of purpose or whatever. Whereas when you're in this new territory, which is actually better, obviously it's clearly the transformation, but it's like, but now that I'm in this new land, what does anything mean? And that can be also kind of frightening in its own right, and I think there's my point is when you get to the new land, out of the dark valley into the new land, you try to sometimes bring the old land to the new land and try to function in the new land as though it were the old, and it just isn't. It doesn't work. And, and I think there's this period of the new land where you have to go, the world is blank and you don't have an answer for blank. And that's a frightening period in this process.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, you brought in like the mountain and the valley, and I was just thinking of back to like the river sort of analogy of like the flow. It's like, well, you're in this flow and you had this desire, but that desire was a mile back over there. And not only would it be silly and foolish to attempt to go and do that, it's actually would be impossible, right? Because you're part of the flow, right? You're not apart from it. You are a part of this thing. And there's, again, it's like that presence thing of it's like, well, yeah, it's like whatever is present to you now. And maybe you're going down the river and maybe there's, other spots you can start to push yourself towards on the river, but there's no going back to that thing. Right. And also like, but I was also even thinking it's like, okay, but well, like what is the desire to go over to that side of the river and try and like climb up on top but then you're not part of the flow anymore. Right. But again, there's no never being part. I'm going to stop because I'm going to get myself. Yeah. It's getting out of control. And actually speaking of control, that was something that popped into my head, where this whole thing of we actually want to be part of the flow. As much as we think that we're afraid of that thing, it's actually what we want, right? And probably some of our most joyful moments that we can recall were moments that we were actually just completely in flow with whatever was going on, at the time. And I mean, we even talk about, the peak experience of flow, right? I won't get into that, but it's a thing. It's a real thing that's researched, because it's a state that we can enter into as human beings, where it's kind of like, yeah, where self-awareness drops out and we're just, we are a part of just whatever is happening, whatever we're involved in. There's no sense of a separate I doing a thing. It's just we're in flow with what's going on. That's why they call it in flow. And we want that thing. But we instead we're trying to dropping pens. We instead try to control things. And control is fear. When we try to control things, we are both in a fear state, but we're also perpetuating a fear state. Because trying to control, again, you're trying to control something that's in flow. You're never you can't do it. It's impossible. It's just, the water just keeps coming. What are you going to do? You can't do it. You can't control all of it. Eventually the dam will break or whatever metaphor you want to use. I'm not going to try and do it. So many water metaphors. But flow is excitement. Control is fear. Flow is excitement, right? There's something that's exciting about when you can enter into that thing. And it's been said that the experience, like physiologically, the experience of fear and excitement are pretty much identical to each other, right? And it's part of how the world is blank, I think fits into it, right? And I think that some of them, of the way that we're looking at it, leads us into a place of flowing with life, flowing with the world and everything, and other things try and lead us to controlling it, right? I need to control all of these things, but it's a losing game. It's an impossible thing to attempt, which is part of why I think the anxiety just kind of keeps ramping up on itself, because you just need to try and exert more and more and more and more and more control over things. And nobody likes to be around a controlling person. You know, like controlling people are kind of no fun to be around, right? It's just like, and everyone's just like, hey, just relax. Like, let's just, you know, like just, let's just go with just flow with the moment and with the present and with what's going on. Trust that things will be okay. You know, it's like if we don't have like our bodies all tensed up and our buttholes all puckered up, you know, like the world's going to fall apart. And it's just like, hey, the world has been turning for billions of years, right? Maybe we can trust that a little bit more. And maybe trust is a big part of this conversation too, but I don't know.
Well, I have one last thought that I'll share before we wrap this baby up. And I would say that, something you're talking about flow and being in that kind of divine state of flow. To me, so much about that is just its presence and attention. And, the past and the future are not real and don't exist because you only remembering, and then the future hasn't happened and may never happen. And so it's all that stuff's just made up. So much of control is about trying to figure out how to get the whole river of the past and the future of it to somehow be, the way you want it to be. And it's like, no, like it's just like be in the moment, be present, pay attention. And then you can begin to allow the flow, because here's the thing, no matter what you do, you're always in flow. It's more of a whether a matter of like, are you allowing yourself to accept flow? Because or are you just kind of like trying to like hang on to an ice cube in a river? Like it's like, you're still moving, like it's all happening. You're getting older every day. Your heart's beating, like you're taking in different air than you took in the last breath. It's all kind of happening all the time. And so you can kind of just go, okay, like, I can control the little amount that I can control and then just let go of everything else. And I think the other thing too is like looking at it in terms of where you put your attention, you're going to get more of, and you're going to find that you collect it. It like, being present is actually being aware of what's actually happening and not being in denial of it. But like attention gets you more of that. And they talk about this, and I love using these terms. Filtering is a form of attention. You put attention on the red car, you see more red cars. You also block out the brown cars that you weren't looking for. Filtering, kind of more attention on something gets you more of it. The other thing too is framing. So if you look at the big scope of things, you see more of what's going on, but you miss the little details. If you move the frame in and you tighten it up, you get the little details, but you miss the big picture. So attention is just like, what do you need right now? Like if you're in something that I was thinking about as we were talking is like when you're in a relationship and you're in a fight with your partner, your world is so small. It's just you and them and how you feel. so tiny, like nothing else matters. It's just like, okay, let's just get through this feeling and whatever we're going through. And then you get through it and then you open, and that's a really small, tight frame. But then you get out of that fight, you get out of that argument or whatever's going on, and then you open back up and other people are included in your life again, and you're doing other things and you have a job and like whatever, right? But like for those moments, pillow talk, you're just there with that person. You might be locked with your eyes and it's just the emotions and that's all that matters. It's tiny. But that's presence and attention, right? And so then the other thing too is patterning. And this is one of the other ones. And this is a big storytelling technique, which is that you're the one that decides if something fits together and creates a pattern and is repetitive or not. Like you're the one that notices. So if you notice how everybody is hurting you over and over and over again, the world's going to become a pattern of hurt. But if you notice how people are actually smiling at you all the time and you looked for smiles and you looked for love and you looked for these things, you would begin to find a pattern of love. And so then the world is blank is a lot to do with filtering, framing, and patterning and, attention and presence. I think that's ultimately like a lot of what, for anybody who's at the end of this conversation trying to fill in that blank, presence and attention is going to give you that answer. And how you do it, it's a bigger thing, but it's a start, it's a start. So anyway, dude, this beer, delicious beer. I want you to share. Do you want me to say what it is? Or do you want?
Sure, go for it.
Slackwater Brewing. This was Evan. He got this delicious beer. Idleback Amber Ale with Cascade hops. Anyway, it's delicious. It's smooth. It's tasty. My first sip I was like, wow, this is a good beer. This is nice and tasty. Yeah, man, I don't know. So I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, no, it's been really good. I was lured by the can. What can I say? It's simple as that. I love the art and the color and everything. It was just like, oh, that just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. So nice. I'm going to do it. Yeah, it's been good. I've been enjoying it. So, all right. Final thoughts? Yeah, final thoughts. I mean, I don't know. This is I'm still walking away being like, this was it was very interesting, but also I'm like, this was a peculiar one in many ways too. And yeah, like I think that I'm walking away still thinking about the whole side of this conversation of presence and what you're, and you brought in, attention, to this thing and because the world is so often just whatever we're aware of in the moment. I mean, that's maybe all it ever is, all it ever can be, in reality, right? As much as we try and escape that notion and try and think that it's something else, it's just like, well, it's like whatever it is that you're thinking about it, well, that's whatever it is right now. Right. And so we're always in this present state, right? As you were saying, like we're always in this flow, but it's like, how much are we resisting that? Right. And because even in resistance, that's part of what's happening in the flow is that experience of you resisting it. But it's not a pragmatic way of doing it, which is another part of this conversation, right? It's like, well, what's the way of approaching this that actually allows you to just be more consciously, mindfully part of the flow, which its byproduct is that it creates less stress, anxiety, and things like that in your life. And, and I know this is very much true about certainly acting. Like I'm thinking about that to a large degree. Like so much of the message that I'm constantly trying to hammer through with actors is this idea of like, give up this idea of what you think is supposed to be going on and trying to control what's happening in the situation and say, like, what would happen if you really just listened to the other person that's across from you? What if that feeling that's coming up in you right now that you didn't plan on happening in it, and instead of stuffing that thing down and actually allowing that to come through in your performance, what would happen? Mm-hmm. What would happen if you just did these simple things? what would happen? And, to jump towards the end of the book on that one, what ends up happening is an actor who's so much more alive and vibrant and exciting to watch, and who actually is performing and acting beautifully and responding with absolute sincerity and truth to what's going on, right? And the only thing that you had to give up was your control over the situation, right? And to step into the flow of what was going on. And once you start to experience that and feel that thing, you're just like, oh, fuck. This is all I want. This is all I want. I want, like, you just want to give up that game that you were up to before because of just how unnecessarily it makes you struggle, and there's enough challenge already in life that we don't need to pile more on top of it. So yeah, I guess my last thing is like, hey, give up control and step into the flow.
Yeah, well, I do think that's a big part of what we're talking about, this presence and attention, and kind of comes full circle to some degree, because I feel like it always comes back to that, no matter what. And I think that there's some kind of truism in that element of, every conversation and everything we ever talk about could probably come back to this whole idea of be present and pay attention. And then, because until you find that kind of point, how do you build anything out of it? And so then I'd say, well, there is a certain amount. I think what's happening is where people don't want to just do that is because they want to build before they do that. And I'd say you have to do that to build. So like that, the building blocks begin in presence and attention, and then you get to build out. But people are always trying to build before they do that and kind of skip that step. And what I mean is that if you got really present with yourself, I'm sitting in a chair, there's a mic in front of me, I'm looking at Evan, like this is what's happening. This is where I'm at. I feel pretty good. My body feels loose. I don't feel really any pain in my body. You kind of get a sense of, okay, this is where I am and this is what's happening and this is. Then you can begin to go, okay, well, like, what do I want to build? And it's not control, but more like putting your ideals into how you're moving. And so then you go, well, like, I want a world of love and peace and connection and harmony and friendship and these types of things. And so then you go, okay, well, like, how can I do this moment, which would kind of create that? And so I would say, like, one of the things to fill in with blank is first to go, the world is blank. The world is now, right now. Like, what is now? Now is I'm here. This is what's happening. That's the first answer. The second answer is, what do you want the world to be? And then you begin to work from this part in the moment to that part in the moment. Because one of the big challenges that I know we all face, and this is not my idea, this has been proven time and time again, but that we take our past and we put it into our future, and then we live out our present as though our past is dictating our future. And so I think the world is blank. You could go like, hey, the world was blank in my interpretation, but now, today, in this moment, is it like, first of all, like, if you experience the world as war and chaos and bullying, is it bullying right now? And if you're probably honest with yourself, it's like, no, it's not. It's actually pretty peaceful and harmonious right now. Okay, great. So if it is that, then that's not true. That immediately negates the idea that the world is war. If you're at peace right now, then the world isn't war because you're at peace right now. So this is more true than whatever you thought you experienced. And then you can go, well, what's the world that I'm building and creating in myself? And if you put attention towards that, you'll probably find more of that. But the problem is like, and this is something I've found in myself, is I put attention on my past traumas and then brought them into my life, because in my future, I'm putting attention into them, and then my future is bringing me more of that shit. So put your attention into what you want, and then you move into that. And then, like, yes, you're on the river, but yes, you also kind of get to flow in the side of the river you want to be on, and you get to kind of find your, You get to find your form in it. And if you resist the river will force you somewhere, and it might not force you where you want to go. And that's why I think conscious awareness and presence and attention is kind of why it all comes back down to that anyway. So yeah, I agree, Evan. It is a big fucking talk. I mean, I honestly, like, I don't know what to say, man, other than, go for it. Like, fill in that blank with whatever's now, and then try to fill it with something that you want to move towards, and stop filling it with something that happened in the past that you don't want to move towards. And that's my best advice. Take it or leave it. Take it with a grain of salt. It's the best thing I know how to do at this moment. And yeah, this was a fun talk, though.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.